Come on, be honest with me. How many of your one-to-one conversations do you just stumble into with zero preparation? Have you ever sat in a meeting and wondered, what are we trying to achieve here? Or walked away from a conversation thinking, that was a complete waste of time? Yeah, let's fix that today. Hi, I'm Sehaam Cyrene, and I teach leaders how to prepare and show up for their one-to-one and team meetings using coaching skills. You're joining me on the Leaders Who Coach podcast today to master the coach leadership conversation arc. This is going to take the boredom, the frustration, the confusion, the wasted energy, the lack of outcome, or painfully slow decision making, basically the drag, out of your conversations. And when you start to apply this conversation arc consistently to more and more of your meetings, you'll be thanking me and wondering why no one ever told you about it before. Yes, it's about time, and I'm going to take you through this important framework, including what questions you want to be asking at every stage in the coach leadership conversation arc. The purpose of the coach leadership conversation arc is to create clarity about what's important to discuss and explore in this meeting, to be efficient because you're focused on the aspects that are relevant and are most important, and finally, to increase confidence in the solution, the decision, the next steps. Just like a story arc, conversation arcs in good coach leadership conversations have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning involves things like preparation, an agenda, an agreement about what you're going to discuss, the outcome you both want in the time that you have available. This supports clarity. The middle is where you get everything relevant and related out on the table to examine, explore, and deep dive into. It's a bit like a sifting process, and what you have left is what's most important to consider for the solution. This ensures efficiency. The end is where you settle on the solution or next steps with some final stress testing for things like bad timing or sequencing or resistance and risks. This generates the confidence in us both that the decisions or next steps are the optimal ones at this point in time. The conversation arc works for all work conversations, check-ins, growth one-to-ones, feedback conversations, negotiations, delegating, decision-making, escalations, and troubleshooting. What makes it a powerful framework is that it's repeatable, simplifies preparation, is easy to remember, and drives consistency. As a coach leader, you want a mechanism that becomes second nature and that can be used for a 5-minute walk and talk check-in to an in-depth 1-hour meeting. Bottom line, you want to empower your people to take the initiative, solve their own problems, and feel confident about being held accountable for the outcomes they can absolutely deliver on. I mentioned earlier that the beginning involves things like preparation, an agenda, an agreement about what you're going to discuss, the outcome you both want in the time that you have available. Preparation involves setting some time aside to prepare for the conversation. Expert coach leaders can get this bit down to 5 minutes or less because they do these things. They keep good notes about the last conversation, perhaps with their personal values noted on the side. They've usually aligned ahead of time what the upcoming conversation needs to cover because of a quick check-in with their team member ahead of the meeting, or it was agreed at the end of the last meeting. So you kick off the meeting, synchronize energy with a bit of chatter and banter, how's things, and what's been a win for you this week? Asking about the weather is a bit dull, no? Some people call it small talk and can't be bothered with it. Yeah, okay, but you do then miss the chance to read body language, energy levels, learn what's got them buzzing this week, or what's taken the wind out of their sails. And coach leaders don't like missing out on simple mechanisms for reconnecting or tuning into the person in front of them and gathering valuable data. even if it's from sharing some banal piece of information. Let's talk about the agenda. While there may be a particular topic that you've agreed to explore with your team member, you want to stay flexible to the agenda of your one-to-one meeting, changing a little bit or completely in response to the latest events or changing priorities. Also, at the start of a conversation or meeting, you get clear on what the real issue to discuss is, because you understand that what appears on the surface to be the issue can often be something different once you start deep diving into it. For example, what appears to be a time management issue could well turn out to be an issue with a colleague who's disruptive and eats a lot of their time. So the real issue might actually be a relationship one about boundaries, roles and responsibilities, dependencies, quality of work, risks created, and so on. So while you might start with, what would you like to explore? You would do well to follow up with, can you expand on that? And why is that important? To invite them to elaborate on the issue as soon as you get a sense that there might be something deeper to uncover. You're also mindful and respectful of the time you have together, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour. And at the start of the conversation, you get clear between the two of you what's realistic to cover in the time that you have. And then finally, for now anyway, is possibly the most important part of the beginning of the coach leadership conversation arc, which is agreeing what your team member wants or needs to have by the end of this conversation with you. In coach leadership, this is referred to as contracting at the start of the conversation. And when you don't do it, your conversation loses direction when you're in the middle part of the conversation exploring lots of different threads of the same topic. You reach a point where you're no longer sure if this exploration is heading in the most useful direction, and you can't be sure it's going to deliver the conversation outcome they want because it was never defined at the beginning. You with me? So you've done a shallow dive to be sure that what they said they want to explore with you is actually the real topic they want to explore. And you clinch the contracting by asking, what outcome do you have in mind? Or even simpler, what do you want to walk away with from this conversation? There's that saying, isn't there? Begin with the end in mind. Cliche as it may be, it's always true. Of course, like anything, there are nuances to all these aspects, but there's plenty here for us to get started with. All right, that's the preparation, a realistic agenda for the time that you have together and the outcome they need from the conversation with you. That's the beginning of the coach leadership conversation arc, which in a 60-minute conversation would represent maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how complex or straightforward the topic is. And for a shorter one-to-one conversation, say 15 minutes, that's perhaps the first 2 to 3 minutes. Now we're ready to get stuck in, to get everything that's relevant and related to the chosen topic for this conversation out on the table to examine, explore, and deep dive into. We help our team members to sift through their data, their experiences, their values, their knowledge, and concerns about the topic and the issues, the risks, and the knots. There's no judgment, there's no jumping to solutions. We're just lifting up a piece, looking at it from different angles, possibilities, before moving on to the next piece. We're helping our team members or direct reports to make connections, notice patterns. Sometimes we role play to play out an event to different possible conclusions, to understand other people's positions. We are fully inquisitive. Yes, it's a bit messy and we jump around a bit, but it is the most efficient way to explore. As the coach leader, you're their thinking partner. You're following their trail of thoughts and at the same time reflecting your observations to them, what you're noticing about them and their thought process, because this external perspective helps grow their self-awareness. It gives them a chance to change their minds or adjust their approach if they want. You hold back on telling them what to do, how to fix things, because this limits them in their thinking and actually disempowers them because you haven't asked them what they think. This is probably not your intention at all, but not finding out what they have already tried is missing a very important beat. You could also be unleashing the horrible power dynamic that as their boss, they might default to your direction. And that is risky for you because you actually create a dependency on you, a future demand on your own time, because the protocol is established that what you say goes. You become a bottleneck and worse, find yourself doing a lot of firefighting. And I'm sure that does not fill your day with joy. Another reason you hold back on solving the issue too soon is because you know that with patience, good questions, and deep listening, there's a better solution to hold out for, or at least you'll both know that you've covered all bases that are important. You hold back on solutioning because really that's the easy bit that they can probably do with their eyes closed. The hard bit, the why they're here having this conversation with you, is to explore their doubts, their hesitations, their emotional attachments, their energy, their fear of upsetting someone who's in their way, their sense of integrity, their conviction. That's what your role is in these conversations, to give them a safe space to unpack all the things that are worrying them and the things they'll never admit to in public or say out loud that have them trapped in a negative headspace, and to help them see for themselves that they know exactly what needs doing and how they can do it successfully. A bit like a rehearsal. Once you get them into a positive headspace, your direct report knows exactly what to do and why. And to get there, they need to think through their options, not yours, not your solutions, theirs, because the more they talk those through, the more their emotional attachment to being successful grows. And that's the secret to creating accountability among your team members. Throughout this whole exploration, you put your direct report, the person you're coaching, at the center of the conversation, helping them move from a negative headspace or just a place of a bit of doubt to a positive headspace where they are visualizing the outcome and are clear about the outcome they want. In the Leaders Who Coach course, this is the concept I have called the who energy model, because in coaching, when we're stuck about what to do, it's typically because we've got some conflicting thoughts or ideas about who we need to be and how we're showing up. You and I are exploring the Who energy model in the next Leaders Who Coach podcast. So make sure you're subscribed on your favorite platform so you know when that episode drops. Okay, before I share with you some questions you want to be using in this middle part of the Coach Leadership conversation arc, here's a little challenge for you. Here's your Leaders Who Coach conversation challenge. In your next one-to-one conversation, rate yourself out of 10, where 10 is I'm awesome and 1 is got some work to do here. And here's what you're going to be rating yourself on. Number 1, did I speak just 20% of the time? Number 2, did I create silences for my conversation partner to fill? Number 3, when my conversation partner dropped in a feeling word, did I ask them about it? Number 4, did I notice any changes in their body language and how did I use that information? And number 5, when my conversation partner displayed strong feelings, did I hold space for them to speak? This simple self-observation exercise brings into practice key Leaders Who Coach skills: coach leadership presence, listen to understand, ask good questions, and clean and clear language. Check out my YouTube playlist for tips on all these skills and come back and let me know how you did. To learn more about Leaders Who Coach, check out the links in my profile and get yourself over to the Leaders Who Coach podcast on your favourite platform to start learning and practicing magical coach leadership skills for your very next conversation. So we're clear, right, on your role in these coaching conversations with your direct reports and team members. Okay, here are some questions you want to be using during the exploration, the middle part of the coach leadership conversation arc. Your direct report comes to you with a problem. You ask, what have you already considered? This invites them to share before you jump in with your ideas and solutions that might actually shut them down. You pick up on a feeling word they threw in. You ask, what makes you feeling word? Why is that? Because you know that feelings play a major part in stalling us from doing something, usually because we're compromising on one of our personal values. You notice they repeat certain words or phrases, so you ask, you mentioned word or phrase a few times. What's significant about that? Because you know this typically signifies there's something important to them about it, a concept they believe in or are passionate about. You're watching for shifts in posture or body language as they talk about a related aspect, so you reflect that back to them. Your energy picked up, dropped off there. What's that about? Because as well as offering some further insight, it helps them become more self-aware of their own energy changes. You help them check their own assumptions by asking, what's the impact or consequence or risk if you don't do that? So they can safely name it, assess it, and check if it's real or just a limiting belief. You're curious about how they reached their conclusions and you want them to be sure. So you ask, how true is that? And how can you find out so that they can separate assumptions from facts? You champion their growth and thinking and courage by asking, what needs to be different or better? You remind them that there are other people who could help them by asking, what do you need to ask for? Or who can help you with that? You stretch their sense of possibility by asking, what else can you do? You check in with them halfway through by asking, is this helpful? Are we on the right track? To make sure you're both still exploring the important stuff, because you remember we're human and we have a habit of going off track sometimes. Aren't these great questions? Can you see how open and inviting they are? How much they encourage your direct report to explore creatively and without judgment? If you're enjoying these questions, you'll love my Better Conversations rulebook, questions and phrases practiced daily by leaders who coach. If you have it, check out rule number 4, simple questions. You'll hear me talk about questions in pretty much every episode of the Leaders Who Coach podcast because they are the most powerful tool you can have as a leader and as a coach leader especially. From my professional observations, partnering with C-suite leaders, senior leaders and leadership teams, questions are the most underused conversation technique in leadership for gaining buy-in, creating emotional connections, and in problem solving. What I see a lot of is talking at people, telling them why our approach is better, and then proceeding to get irritated when we haven't been able to influence them or convince them. Our old friend Socrates is believed to have said, I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only teach them to think. This is never truer than in a coach, leader, and a team member dynamic. When you as a coach leader can help your direct reports to think more deeply, more critically about a situation they're facing, the result is that you enable them to come up with their own solutions, the ones they are most likely to follow up on. Ownership leads to willing accountability. In terms of how much time to spend here on exploration, this is the middle part of the conversation arc, so roughly 50 to 60% of your time. So that's a good chunk. For a 60-minute conversation, that's about 30 to 35 minutes. For a shorter conversation, well, that's roughly half the time you have together. And why is that? Why do we spend the majority of our time here? As I mentioned earlier, the doing, the coming up with the solution, the next steps, that's the easy part. And you will know that you have a good approach if you've invested time exploring the topic thoroughly together. And that's why your questions as a coach leader are so important, because they set up the final, the end part of the conversation arc beautifully. If you facilitated a really great exploration, you find that your direct report, more often than not, starts to settle on their own solution, their actions, building out their next steps, almost effortlessly. A bit like us dropping into this next bit. Still in strong listening mode, you want to check on their actions, check for trouble spots, stress test their thinking and sequencing of events. Remember, you want them to leave your conversation feeling as confident as possible about what they're going to do, including when things go wrong to avoid escalations, mitigating risks, anticipating problems and resistance from other people, getting the sequencing right, not missing important dependencies, connections, or stakeholders. Questions you want to be asking here are, let's check in. What do you have? To get them to summarize their actions, because saying them out loud reinforces ownership. To stress test their plans, you ask, what could derail you? And then a bit later, what can you do to avoid that happening? To crystallize their commitment to the actions they've designed, you ask, how will that feel? Or how will you know you've succeeded? To check their readiness to take action, you can ask, when will you do that? Or when will you start on that? These last bits we often skip, thinking there's no need to get that detailed. Wrong. It's super helpful to start mapping the actions out in our calendars, because that activity in itself will surface any blockers or limitations, things they need to shuffle around or rethink. Those are exactly the simplest of logistical considerations that do delay, derail, or have us abandon our plans. Of course, there are conversations and explorations where you as a coach leader are privy to and have additional information about deadlines, stakeholders, budgets, historical events, and so on that are relevant to the topic your direct report is exploring with you and which they are not aware of. There are optimal moments for sharing this knowledge with them, including your thoughts on what else they need to consider, because you are, after all, responsible not just for this direct report, but for your whole team or organization. I cover that in a future episode of the Leaders Who Coach podcast. But for now, it's important to know the best times for sharing this information is not at the very beginning, but at an optimal moment in the exploration, the middle part of the conversation arc, and again during the end in the conversation arc. Why not at the very beginning? Because this is likely where you are at risk of telling them what to do or coming up with the solutions too soon. Remember, during these coaching conversations, you are always looking for opportunities to grow the capability of your team members. And doing the critical, deep thinking is an essential part of that. Inviting them to share their thoughts and exploring those with them first makes them much more open to new, additional, and relevant information that could make their solution even better. And to wrap up, it's good for you and them to gauge what new awareness they have now that they've done a deep exploration of the topic. And you can simply ask, what new awareness do you have about? There's growth in here. This self-awareness grows their self-confidence and their capability. It's self-sustaining too. They start to notice how they do things better, not just for this topic you've explored with them. They start to notice how they're applying themselves and showing up in other situations where there might be a similar dynamic at play. I'm often delightfully surprised by what people share as their new awareness, which goes to show I too still have some growing to do. That's how it is in coach leadership. There is always something new to understand. Kind of cool. So, can your one-to-one conversations be more productive? Have I convinced you that there is a better way to prepare and hold these conversations? Do elements of the coach leadership conversation arc appeal to you? Does the whole framework give you a structure you can experiment with? Have I demonstrated how your questions expand the thinking of your direct report and contribute to their growth and willingness to hold themselves accountable for outcomes? I hope that once you start to apply some of the coach leadership conversation arc elements that I've shared with you today, that you find yourself less and less frustrated with your meetings, how you are spending your time. And for your direct report, you empower them to take the initiative, solve their own problems, and feel confident about being held accountable for the outcomes they absolutely can deliver on. I would love us to banish the thoughts, this meeting was a waste of time, and I really don't know what we achieved in that conversation. And you can start with your very next conversation using the coach leadership conversation arc. Remember, the purpose of the Leaders Who Coach conversation arc is to create clarity for your direct report about what's important to discuss and explore in this meeting, to be efficient because you're both focused on the aspects that are relevant and most important, and finally, to increase confidence that your direct report feels in their solution, their decisions, their next steps, and their ability to achieve success. Thank you for joining me today. Have you subscribed to the Leaders Who Coach podcast yet? Do it now. If you enjoyed today's episode, let me know with a thumbs up and a review rating on your favorite platform so I can reach more leaders like you who want to enjoy their time in leadership and get more value, more connection, and more growth out of their conversations. Check out the links in the description for more details on the Better Conversations rulebook, including a team discount code for volume orders of the print edition, links to my socials, and of course, the Leaders Who Coach course. Do let me know how you get on and what you did try, what was challenging for you, or where there was growth for you, and what worked like magic. As mentioned earlier in the Leaders Who Coach podcast, you and I are getting into the Who energy model for leaders who coach, so we understand why sometimes we're not connecting or reaching our people and what you can do to build trust in every conversation going forward. Join me then on the Leaders Who Coach podcast.